Right.
Cool.
Okay.
So welcome to the episode of Couples Plus Podcast. And today we have a special guest with us. He goes by the name of Phoenix. Phoenix, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Nice to meet you also. Thanks for having me.
So, Phoenix and I are old friends, and I hope you don't mind if I talk about that for a second. Like, we met, I think, 11 years ago, working on the V-Day campaign, and I'm pretty sure the first time we interacted, we were building a model of a giant vulva. So, and since then, our paths have always kind of like we always end up like doing workshops and stuff together. And I just want to like sing your praises because I think everything that you do is super cool. So what do you want to share about your journey? What are you up to these days?
Yeah, so I do still remember the glitterous fondly, and I refer back to it a lot. Since then, I'm in private practice right now, holistic wellness and recovery, and I see individuals, couples, and groups around a variety of issues related to healing, wellness, recovery, things like that.
Are you open to talking a little bit about your spiritual path and if there's an intersection with that?
Yes, I am. My spirituality is very important to me. It's so important that I actually got initiated or ordained, if you will. And I do also function as an archpriest here in Buffalo, New York. And that is a huge part of my work. It's a huge part of like my programming and my outreach to the community. So it's definitely on the table.
Cool. So what does that mean for people that aren't familiar with that?
So I am absolutely unapologetically pagan. I am a soft polytheist, and I recognize the diversity of gender in all of God's creations. And I'm thankful to her for all of the things that she's put in my path that, she allows me to observe and interact with. And I actively incorporate that into, like, as an example, as a way for me to function personally and as a way to help heal, the planet, the people around me, and, her creation.
Sweet.
That's really cool.
You just said something that it helped me understand your character, but God's a woman? Oh,
absolutely.
I've been saying this for forever, and my wife can attest to this, but I agree with you 100%, 1000% actually. What do you feel your work is in conversation with?
So I specifically like to work with people of color who are queer, who are searching for some kind of wholeness or searching for some kind of reconciliation, of their self. To be like very blunt about it, life is like tough as shit. It's very hard. And whether or not things happen to us on purpose as a result of like malice or as a result of, the world that we live in, or if things happen just on life's own terms, there is a huge amount of recovery that has to happen. There's some reconciliation that has to happen. And I regularly find that queer people of color are on the shittiest end of the stick. And as someone who does have a decent amount of privilege, I'm pretty straight passing. I'm clearly a male, and I'm lucky for all of those things. I like to extend that to people who might not be, that lucky or that privileged, and help them experience some wholeness, help them experience some healing, and help them, kind of like recognize their inner divinity and help them bring it to a place where they can shine and, be a beacon to other people, kind of like an each one, teach one kind of mentality.
Got it.
I love what you said about recognize your inner divinity. And if there's anything else you could add to that.
Yeah, so I personally believe that everyone has a soul, and that's the spark that is literally just God within each and every last one of us. And the various things that can happen to us, or the various things that we start to believe about ourselves, can dampen that spark, or make it harder for other people to see it, or harder for us to recognize it. And so I think that, coming to terms with that recognition is like of the utmost importance.
What is your hope for humanity in terms of sexuality?
I want to see sex as no longer a weapon or a tool for, harming or controlling or being divisive. I want to see sexuality being celebrated openly, freely, without harm, without violence, kind of the way that I believe it was intended, as evidenced by nature.
Mm.
I like that you kind of fold in like along with sex and your spiritual practice, that gender is folded into it too, that gender, like all of your identity is magic to some extent. And I'm just curious if that's something that you've always sort of known, or if that was an awakening, or like, how did you get there?
So there was an aha moment where I was in biology class, and we were talking about the various forms that a species can manifest. And that like we pay a lot of attention to like the binary forms that a species can manifest. However, there are lots of examples of how a species can manifest a little bit differently than what like that typical manifestation is, right? So, in plants, some plants have a stamen, anther, piston, and then like some plants in the exact same species might like have all three, and like that is a miracle. In humans, we've got X chromosomes and Y chromosomes, but then sometimes there's different configurations or different pair-ups of those chromosomes, and that is a miracle. It's the same thing in other parts of the animal kingdom. It's the same thing in other parts of the plant kingdom. Fungus is a completely different kind of manifestation altogether. And then somehow all of these things come together to create like the beautiful diversity that we see, and it all sustains life, and it all has a purpose, to some degree. And so I reflect that in community with everything that I look at, so that gender is not necessarily a limiting factor, but something that I can use like as a lens to help understand other people, based on how they communicated to me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I was also a little bit curious, since you have like a congregation or a coven. I'm not sure what the right nomenclature is for that. Are you open to talking a little bit about community building and like that process?
Absolutely. It requires a lot of letting go of judgments and assumptions. Absolutely. Building community requires a high degree of authenticity. You've got to be yourself whenever you are reaching out to anyone to try to build a community. That way it's easier to be consistent that way. Someone expects me to be witty, sarcastic, funny, and that's what they always get because that's who I am. They expect me to be the chief of call outs for inconsistency, like that's who I am. People expect me to be honest and gentle, or honest and firm, every time they see me because that's who I am. And being consistent like that is one of the best ways to build a community, to not trip people up. They see you one way, then they see you another way, and then they see you another way. It becomes hard to trust someone. It becomes hard to trust what their goal is or what their vision is.
Mm-hmm.
So that authenticity is absolutely essential to building community. Having a stake in the community that you want to build is also essential. I don't think it's possible to build a community for other people if you are not a part of it to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe in like the white man's burden or bearing anyone else's cross, right? Like the community it's my thing, it's my baby. I'm here to nurture it. I am also luckily someone who is not going to have any children biologically. So that means that any energy that I would put into rearing children, I can actually put into nurturing a community and uplifting other people. And I think that that's also an essential kind of component to being a community builder, is having that energy to actually put into it. Like you can't half-ass it. You can't, I'm going to part build a community, and then see how that goes. And if it falters, it falters. And if it grows, it grows. You kind of constantly water it, constantly fertilize it, constantly be present for it. Because it's the thing that I'm going to be known for. It's a part of my legacy.
Mm-hmm.
what, with all of the information and knowledge that you've gathered over the years with what you do, what would you say your current self would tell your past self? If you can give any advice to your past self.
I would tell my past self, definitely stay the course, because I'm doing everything that I wanted to be doing. I'm in private practice. I'm in my PhD program. I have a temple. I'm an out and proud queer and pagan. Those are all the things that my, younger self was like, am I going to be able to do this? Like, is the world going to be ready for what I want to do? Is there going to be a space for me? So I would definitely say stay the course. I would actually tell myself to come out a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
I'm curious, feel comfortable talking about that part of your journey, like the coming out process and how difficult that may have been as a Black man? Well, again, all of these things that me per se, like, I can't speak intelligently to, because that's not my journey, but I would definitely love to hear it, from your perspective, how it was for you and how you can also help others that may be feeling the same way and are looking for their breakthrough.
Yes. So coming out was, again, it was a privileged experience, because once I told everyone who I cared about and who cared about me, like exactly what was going on, the space was clear for me to be really real with them and for me to allow them to be really real with me. So I had always assumed that my family would have no room for queer, pagan, witchcraft practicing, goddess worshiping, African diaspora interested like man in the family. But as soon as I came out and talked about it openly, I was very quickly able to find that my spiritual views were actually reflected in a lot of my uncles. And there was not, first of all, a lot of my family already knew that I was queer to some degree. And they were just like waiting for me to say it. So when I did come out, they're like, oh, yeah, of course. But the thing that I had to go through in order to get to that point is I had to stop believing some of the assumptions that I had. I had to stop listening to, what the media said about Black families and queer members of the family. So I had really believed that there was going to be some violence. I had really believed that, coming out was going to mean that I had to give up my family. And that was my fault. That wasn't even their fault. No one had actually said, you can't come out. No one actually said you can't be who you're going to be. I believe those things along the way, and I had to fight that down, choke that down, and actually, just come out, tell the truth, and let them hold me and let that be a part of who I was in the family. So ever since doing that, there are family members who will ask me hey, there are little queerlings in the family now. What's the word on how to raise them so that they, recognize earlier on that it doesn't have to be a secret? There are family members who are like, hey, so faith is very interesting right now. What is it that you know, or what is it that you learn, or how is it that you meditate and pray and seek divine guidance in a way that's really authentic and makes sense and, doesn't perpetuate this kind of image of, Black people being in chains. And so I don't want to toot my own horn and say that I was kind of the catalyst, but someone in my family at some point said something, and I do believe it was one of my uncles, who said that, the thing that you're afraid of and the thing that you want are the same thing. And if you can find a way to hold space for both of them, you'll be free. And that was the thing that really blew everything open for me. That's the thing that I share with my cousins, who also, to some degree practice a form of magical faith or paganism, who are reaching out into, African diaspora states and, looking into, our origins as a people in that way. So I've actually been able to find community in my own family in those things that I thought were going to be, completely unacceptable.
Really beautiful.
It is.
Very inspiring story.
What you said about that thing you're afraid of is where you'll find yourself. I find that to be very powerful. And to this day, I'm still encountering that at times. And to be honest, this project is a piece of it for me. So you're saying that touches us.
Thanks for telling me.
I have another question. So again, I'm starting to get more into the language, so forgive me if I say something that's incorrect or or not PC, but I really don't understand the difference between queer and being gay. Is it not the same thing, or is it? Yeah, I'm sorry. Explain.
Educate.
Please.
Yes. So the term queer with a capital Q is an umbrella term that kind of encompasses the entire spectrum of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, all those kind of things. So there can be, men who are queer but not necessarily gay. And so like gay is one of those, it's a term that specifically talks about like men who appreciate, enjoy, who love, and kind of chase after like that romantic experience with other men or other male-bodied individuals, or other masculine presenting individuals.
Okay, understand. Okay. So much information. Like, so for a cis man like myself, because that's the word, right? For a straight man, for a cis man like myself, is there any information that you can share where I can help other straight men or cis men understand this journey that others are going through and just make it more of a teachable moment as opposed to this is what you need to know, like in the whole change, the names changing and so on and so forth.
Yeah, just make it safe for other people who are not cis and straight to tell you the truth. Right? When people come to you with their truth and with their story, it's not a challenge to any perspective. Like we all know the world is, for the most part, heterosexual and loves men. So when someone does come to you not being that, just make the environment safe for them to, one, tell you, and two, for them to exist in accordance to their highest good. No one's trying to hurt anyone. That becomes very clear. No one is trying to violate any boundaries. That becomes very clear. And then also using your place of privilege to let other straight men know, hey, you don't have to challenge other people on their truth or their identity. You can let it be true for them and let your truth be true for you.
That's how I live my life. So thank you. I appreciate that.
It just extends onto this other round.
Right. Understood. Wow. Very insightful, very appreciative of your truth and you being able to come on and share, even the vulnerable sides of your journey. I truly appreciate it. I feel like I've definitely learned something here today. I'm sure we have more questions, but I just wanted to put that out there. Like I'm grateful for your experiences and you being able to be truthful in your space. So
thank you.
Did we switch it up now? Ask some. Okay, all right. So I asked the question to everybody. We asked everyone.
What, the playlist? Oh, that I was saving that for the end, but go ahead. No, go ahead.
Maybe we could, switch.
Go ahead.
So we're creating this sex playlist. We call it the sex tape.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, we're curious. What songs do you have on your playlist, or what songs are you having sex to?
Yeah, so I like a lot of the fast beat reggaeton and soca music. And I like it to alternate with some slower stuff. So like the pace can change. And like secretly, like I use that to time out the game a little bit. So definitely Crazy Bone, The World Has Too Many Freaks is on there. Ludacris, What's Your Fantasy is definitely on there. On Your Mind by Neo is definitely on there. Red Light Special by TLC is definitely on there. Sweat by Casely with Lil Jon and Michelle Montano is on there. And My Neck, My Back by Kia is on there as well.
That's awesome.
Those are some of the favorites.
Dope.
Yeah, we'll definitely add those.
For
so we
sure.
started with just one playlist, but we're creating a variety because otherwise, as Asher put it, we are going to have like reggaeton to R&B to like metal. So we're spreading them out into our different bits. So there will be various couples plus sex tape playlists.
Volume 1 through whatever.
Another general question. What is your hope for humanity in terms of sexuality? I feel like you touched on it a little bit, but if you can.
Yeah, so I would love for humanity to recognize that like we all have one, no matter what it is, like we are all on the sexual being spectrum. Even people who identify as ace or asexual, who, you know, don't experience it the same way that other people do, it's still on there, it's still valid. And just like allowing that to just like be the thing. Like, humans are sexual beings to some degree, and there's no need to fear or judge or try to take that away from anyone. And we go ahead.
Ashley just arrived, so I'm going to let her in. So we're going to have another guest, well, another host coming in.
And then we are all a little bit more important than, you know, our sexualities and our sexual orientations. So we bring it with us wherever we go. However, you know, it's eminent and transcendent.
So Ashley is another one of the hosts. Ashley, meet Phoenix.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, Ashley. Nice to meet you also.
So we're talking about like sex and witchcraft and magic and identity and spirituality. And I think that's the highlight reel, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
I love to hear that highlight reel of all the subjects that are being touched on. Yeah.
So if there's one piece of advice that you want to impart on the audience, what would it be? We talked a lot of different things and you gave us a lot of good gems, but if there was just one all-encompassing.
Have fun and be affirming.
Have fun and being okay. I think that.
Can you expound on the be affirming?
Yeah, so who you are, right? That can be affirmed in all of the experiences that you have. Who I am can be affirmed in all of the experiences that I have, as long as I am being truthful and authentic. So this means, you know, honesty. This means good communication. This means setting important boundaries and maintaining them. This means respecting other people's important boundaries as well.
I believe you're a sex therapist too, correct?
Yep.
Cool. I'm curious just about if you bring spirituality into sex therapy or how you do that. I know what my approach is. I've just always been curious what yours is. So
the bed is the altar, absolutely. Or the platform that you're doing it on, the picnic table, whatever, is the altar.
picnic table, yeah.
And the tools that you might use to set up your altar can also be tools that you use to set up your bed or your sex. So you like oils? Bring oils. You anoint candles? Anoint your partner. You like to bring candles? Use those to set up the light. You believe in a goddess? If your partner is female-bodied or feminine presenting, then invoke her and use that moment as a way of honoring her spirit as well. Treat your partner like divinity. Absolutely no problems. Get over your hangups, right? Like, don't be afraid to eat. Don't be afraid to lick. Don't be afraid to blow. So long as you trust your partner and you trust that you're reaching into that person, you know, for the best possible outcome. Be selfless, absolutely. Just like you're selfless in your devotions to divinity, just like you're selfless in, you know, the way that you pray for others, be selfless in your sex with your partner as well. If every partner involved is more concerned with making their partner have a great time, everyone's having a fucking amazing time. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to have fun.
I was just having this conversation with with a client yesterday too about like actually being present during sex, as opposed to like one of the scopes of my practice is like working with out of control sexual behavior. And sometimes I'm working with clients that are very like this has happened several times where they're like very intent on making something happen. Like it needs to happen just like this. And it becomes obsessive. And it becomes like something they can't actually even be present with. So even if it does happen, something will always be wrong. Or it becomes like such a penultimate thing that they don't know what to do when it does happen. Versus like saying like, hey, we're going to go for a ride. Here are what my boundaries are. What are yours? Ooh, cool. I'm in. Like, and saying like, you know, not necessarily putting parameters around it, but also not having boundaryless, I get to do whatever I want kind of sex and how like there's a difference in presence. And yeah, it just like, that's what it reminded me of there.
Yeah. And so it's really unfortunate being a part of a society that's a little bit prude, a lot of it prude, but also like inundates us with like violent depictions of sex in pornography and, you know, in literature. And then like some of the TV shows we watch are meant to be depicting like teenagers having sex, even though the actors might be, you know, of age or what have you. But like these TV shows that take place in high school with, you know, children in like these compromising positions, it's a little bit problematic for how we come to understand sex. Like I don't want to like name drop anything, but like when I was growing up, there was like One Tree Hill and Degrassi, and you know, these were supposed to be like children who were like my age, you know, 14, 15, 16, 17, you know, really engaging in compromising things. And that absolutely has an impact on the way that we grow up to understand sex. And it definitely makes it so that sex is less dynamic and more kind of rote. And it makes it seem like there's supposed to be one particular thing that happens, right? Like someone is supposed to nut. Not usually everyone, but someone is supposed to nut, you know, at the end of sex. And like, that's kind of it. There's a lot of, you know, pressure for people to perform a certain way, to look a certain way, make certain faces. And so that makes, and so it becomes a little bit abusive to like everyone involved. So letting go of that expectation and just kind of being like, I wonder, you know, what this is going to feel like, or, you know, what is it that we want to create together, you know, during this experience will definitely lead to like a more fulfilling experience.
Great. I mean, I think like the idea of violence is interesting too, because like for people negotiating a kink scene, while that might look outwardly violent, that can be like such a cathartic and like healing experience for people. Whereas like, if you're being pigeonholed and you can only have one type of sex and it's not supposed to be full, it's not supposed to have any pleasure. It's like actually barely touch each other and like, bleh, like just, this is for, you know, I'm going like hands made tail kind of directions here. Like that is so much more violent and so much more antithetical to like the human experience. So yeah, I don't know. Just wanted to chime in with that.
Yeah, and I'm happy you did, because like I'm a little bit frustrated with people who assume that kink is violence because, you know, certain activities take place, whereas some of like the most vanilla kind of regularly depicted sex could be far more violent mentally, physically, emotionally than like any of the things that happens in a consensual, curious kink kind of situation.
Yeah. Totally. I mean, and the idea of like coercion can be very like, it's not the kind of razzle dazzle that Hollywood makes it out to be. And a lot of times it's like a person acquiescing and going, well, I guess let's get this over with because I don't want this to escalate. And that doesn't like sell those kind of tickets. Like, it's not. It's just far more pervasive than what we want to say. Whereas like something like the BDSM scene, which has its roots in, from my understanding from like the queer community too, is about being like, I want to take you on a journey. Like, do you want to go on this journey with me? How do we create a journey together with our bodies, with these tools, with an experience? And like, I don't know, that just strikes me as far less violent, even if there's some spanking and some slapping around.
Agreed. So much agreed.
From what I have learned, both from my my little bit of experience in that world versus what my experience prior, especially entering into my sexuality in my younger years, I find that in the kink community, there's so much more communication. And actually, when he's not here, he just wanted to check on the kids. But when we entered into that world, it opened our communication significantly, and it took our relationship to another level. I'm telling a little bit about how our opening into the kink world a little bit grew our communication, and it helped our relationship. evolve.
It just like kind of comes back to like this idea of power and divinity too. Like it all loops back. I mean, if we think of kink as an exchange of power, a consensual exchange of power, and understanding that a lot of sex is, then like the idea of like almost like worshiping of participating in this way, it totally, I don't know, it just like it shifts the idea of the entire experience. I'm just kind of musing at this point. That's not a question.
Sorry, I missed some.
Yeah, I said you went to do daddy duty to check on the baby. So
Yeah. So what is specifically you say?
no, I just said how like as when we started exploring into the kink world, it opened our communication so much more. It was just responding to what he had shared about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thought it was story time.
No, not story at this time.
This is fun. I love this. And for me, I will add, just for me, just having these conversations and making them less taboo is always. My Mars is an Aquarius, so I love like different shit, and I like to learn different shit. So it's like being in a space where I'm being mentally stimulated, I'm also learning something new. And it's sex. Who doesn't like sex? But like just being in this space and having these conversations, I just find that it's just so much more gratifying and again, just being able to speak to people that are either experts in what they do or just confident in what they do. It just, it adds to the comfort in the conversation, I should say.
And bringing different points of view, like so much learning, so many realizations, even things that I may have had an inkling to, right? But like talking to somebody else and hearing either their experience, their knowledge, their wisdom, their education, just kind of reaffirms certain things within. But yeah, just creating this podcast, this retreat, and having these conversations has done a lot for me already. I know, Ash, you're nodding, because I know you agree. Yeah.
Definitely.
Thank y'all for
Appreciate
enlightening our sex life.
and beyond.
And beyond. Yeah. Plus.
Do you have any questions for us, Phoenix? I don't know.
So what is your hope for humanity in terms of sexuality?
Okay. For everybody to be comfortable with just exist, just as long as you're happy and you're not hurting anybody else. And I mean, that expands outside of sexuality, right? But just exist, just be the best you that you can be at this moment in time.
And just to add to that, mine is just being in the space of universal truth. I think that when people are tapping into that more often, they don't have the mental capacity to mind other people's business about things that don't matter. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues that we have in humanity is people just like to mind other people's business. And again, when you're just living in the space of universal truth, you just don't have the desire to care about what the next person is doing because it's not aligned with your happiness or vice versa.
I support.
I think mine is that, we become more accepting and willing to deal with trauma and how that affects us in our relationship with ourselves and with our partners, especially with men. I hope that more spaces and more men like you become the face of people being able to talk about those things and that they don't have to be ashamed of it. Because I know, if I could have had the tools to deal with my trauma a lot earlier, I would have saved myself years of more trauma and repeating patterns and being in those situations and really not understanding why I was putting myself in those situations. So add in earlier, the stigma around therapy as a whole, but especially when it comes to, because it doesn't have to be like actual like sexual molestation or rape for it to be trauma. Like, I mean, I think you go back and you think about even like as a woman, like your first experience at the gynecologist, and like mine was traumatic. And so like it just becomes all of these things that are layers upon layers about how your body is touched and how you feel and how you open up. So I just hope there become more spaces and with our podcast and showing different healers in that realm, giving people an opportunity to be like, oh, there's people like me I can go talk to and address these issues, and that, you know, I can honor my trauma and have forgiveness, but still be a free sexual being and not be the victim for the rest of your life. So.
Ashe.
I think a lot of what I would like to see is moving away from like the compartmentalization of sex. And this is like when I'm working with like desire discrepancy, but this is sort of how I talked about it. I'm not trying to get people to have sex that they're not jazzed about 3 times a week. Like, so when I'm working, like help people like reestablish that, it's not like, okay, let's put a quota on how much sex we're having. Instead, it's like, instead of having 90% of our lives be, we have to pay bills and do laundry and all this bullshit, like, and do our taxes and blah. And then over here is our sex life. Instead, like making it more fluid, and letting people, like teaching people how to flirt and how to connect and how to do that in all sorts of different ways that doesn't necessarily mean like we're having sex right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like if people aren't secretive about their sex or the sex that they're having or sexuality, if we're actually talking about it, it cuts way down on violence because it's not tied to shame. So moving away from compartmentalization, moving away from shame, moving away from secrecy, so that way people can set boundaries, they can say yes, they can also say no, because all yeses without a no is not a real yes. You need both. And having this like space where people feel safe enough to tap into themselves, to tap in with each other, and to do that in safe ways. So I don't know. I think that might have been kind of opaque, but is what it is.
I got it. Received.
Cool.
All right.
Sometimes I start and I'm like,
Well, thank you all for answering that.
yeah.
Thank you for the question.
For sure.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Before we jump, again, this is an opportunity for you to share anything that you have coming up, any place for our audience to find you. Yeah.
So right now I'm doing a lot of presenting. So I'm presenting at some witchcraft conferences, one in New York City, which is Fest USA, which is actually next week. So folks might not be able to find me there, but you can always find me on my website, holisticwellnessandrecovery.com. I will be presenting virtually at, there's a podcast called That Witch Life, and they have a conference coming up in October. So I'll be presenting at that. I think it's called So Mote That Con. I do also do some alumni ambassador work at the graduate school that I graduated from, Goddard College. So actually, like, weird segue, if anyone is interested in education that is moving in a direction that's remarkably decolonized, I would definitely recommend Goddard College. It's a great school, and they have bachelor's and master's degree programs in sustainability and psychology and counseling and creative arts, those kinds of things. And it's really kind of user driven and accredited, so that's like dope on a roll.
I think one of the most interesting things about you is obviously the space that you're in with your spirituality and the pagan lifestyle, and just being a Black man that's involved in that. I don't think you really touched on it too deep. So if you want, I don't know if there's anything that you might have missed, something that you want to overshare about those experiences, please do. Because again, this is something that's interesting to me. You're like a unicorn in this space, so whenever you have a unicorn in front of you, you might as well just try to get as much information out of it.
Yeah, so I am a Black pagan. I do practice witchcraft, and I do celebrate and participate in some African diaspora faiths. So voodoo, specifically voodoo. There's a temple right on the other side of the Niagara River in St. Catharines, Canada, that I participate in most frequently. And so I really do charge up by celebrating some Black faith, Black spirituality. And I do also find an easy route into activism, utilizing that as well. So yeah, let's see. I don't know if there's any specific question about faith, other than like very polytheistic, God absolutely a woman. And I'm like very glad to say that, without a struggle.
Thanks.
Yeah, and just like the consistency of God is reflected throughout all of nature. And that's kind of like the central theology that kind of guides the way that I interpret any philosophy that I come across.
I may have missed, oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna speak to the idea of the Black deities that you pray to. Is there any, because this is all new information to me, so is there any that you can share that maybe I can look up or anybody can look up to kind of like start to gauge this whole new thing? Yes.
Yeah, so there's definitely the deities that are in the Afro-Brazilian kind of form of African faith. A lot of times they're known as Orishas or Loa. They're coming into big knowledge now. A little bit of appropriation, of course, is happening. But I would definitely say gods of, the Black ancestors. So Papa Legba, Baron Samdi, the interesting story of Mama Brigitte, who, is rumored to actually be in an interracial relationship with Baron Samdi. And the intersection between Mama Brigitte, the Celtic goddess Brigid, and Saint Brigid, in the various ways that, political, political aggression, or the way that people use politics to kind of change stories is a way to kind of like, keep God alive or keep God away from certain people, is like a great example of, seeing how, people who are Black and people who are white can kind of come together for the purpose of survival and kind of thrive. So the reason why I use Baron Samdi and Mama Brigitte as an example is they are from the island of Haiti, which is the first nation in our hemisphere to get their independence or freedom from a colonial power. It's not regularly taught in North American education system, but right there, that combination of you're not going to kill us or suppress us, and the people that you believe have the least amount of power actually have a tremendous amount of power, is a great example. And then also, like, at the core, almost every god is Black. If you consider where gods come from and where storytelling comes from, out of the cradle of civilization, out of places like the Indus Valley, where things like yoga come from, right? Like the original deities were people of color, had color to their skin. So I think more important than looking for a specific deity is to go to a culture that's very important to you and looking up the gods that they worship there, how they did it, what their celebrations were like, what their wheel of the year was like, so to speak. So what holidays were important and why. Why were their goddesses treated a certain way in certain temples, and why were the women the ones who chose their consorts, as a way of kind of understanding faith and theology in that way. And as a way of like circumventing the cultural appropriation that's happening from the African deities at this time.
It all kind of reminds me of like we've been like centering the this project around the idea of coming back home to yourself. And that just makes so much sense to me. And like adjacently my own journey as a person of Scandinavian heritage, of finding that feels like home to me, and being like learning those kinds of traditions and putting my spiritual naturalism in that kind of framework. And I'm like hearing that like our stories echo each other. We're just going to different parts of the globe to do that, which I think is so cool.
That is cool.
Absolutely.
Come back and bring all that knowledge to this one big bowl of knowledge soup.
Yeah. So, and like one of my biggest interests is actually where the stories converge, or where they, mix, and how that kind of fertilizes a new kind of generation of people, or a new kind of aspect of creation. So not necessarily, what each individual ingredient is able to do on its own, but like what happens when you do add the spice or the butter, so to speak, and what kind of flavorful dish, kind of sustains us all as a result of that.
I mean, adjacently, if we ever rebrand this podcast, we could just call it Knowledge Soup?
Yep.
Something you just said, which touches me personally, as a biracial couple raising biracial children, also bicultural children. I am from Peru. I left when I was very young, and I'm still connected, but I am rediscovering that culture and really trying to figure out what it is from there that I want to give on to our children. And we both bring very different experiences, both culturally as well as our personal lives prior to coming, finding each other, and what, learning or figuring out what it is that we are giving to our children from that. So what you said definitely touches me a lot in that sense.
Excellent. Boo, 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 boo.
I love that.
Yeah.
Phoenix.
I think
you.
this has been a super fun time. And a good conversation. And I'm like so happy we got to like collaborate yet again, Phoenix.
Yes, it's always a pleasure. And I will continue to do my best to show up for you, Asher, because you've absolutely showed up and supported, my career and my endeavors as well. So it's definitely like an honor to just jump back in and be like, yo, like, yes, let me do the thing.
Yeah. I mean, we know I think our work is always going to be in conversation with each other, and I like it that way. So I look forward to see what other collabs happen along the way.
Excellent. And it was nice meeting all of you.
Nice meeting you as well.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll keep it footloose and fancy free, and I'm going to stop the recording.
All right. Till next time.
Bye.